Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S IAS Study Circle.
Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 4th July 2022. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us start the discussion. This article on page number 8 is about strains on India-Russia defense cooperation in the context of the Ukrainian war. In this line, various sanctions have been imposed on Russia and efforts have been made to economically isolate Russia. And that has impacted India-Russia defense cooperation also. If you look at India and Russia's defense cooperation, Russia accounts for the largest share in India's defense imports. And that is why India's relations with Russia, especially in the context of the defense dependency, is very, very important. And that has also impacted India's decisions at the international fora, especially in the context of the Ukrainian war and on the issue of criticizing and taking stand against Russia. And this India has done primarily in order to take care of its own interest. In this line, in this article, we are going to discuss how is the India-Russia defense cooperation unfolding, what were certain existing issues in the India-Russia defense cooperation, and then we will look at what has been the impact of the Ukrainian war. And also what India is doing to hedge the issue that is happening because of the Ukrainian war and the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia and its impact on India-Russia defense cooperation. Now, if you look at India-Russia bilateral defense cooperation, a defense mechanism has been created, and this is known as the Intergovernmental Commission on Military Technical Cooperation. In this line, both the countries have highlighted that the relationship of India and Russia have evolved from a purely buyer-seller relationship to joint research, design development, as well as production of state-of-the-art military platforms. And one of the biggest example of joint development is the BrahMos missile that India and Russia are collectively developing. Further, both are also involved in various indigenous production of tanks, fighter jets, along with upgradation of the existing systems. And some of the important defense deals between India and Russia are the S-400 Triumph air defense missile system, the 4 Admiral Grigorovich class frigates, and the manufacturing of Ka-226T helicopters in India. So these are some of the important highlights of the defense cooperation between India and Russia and some of the important defense deals that are currently operational. However, there have been certain existing issues as far as the India-Russia defense cooperation is concerned. In this line, India's huge dependency on Russia in terms of defense imports has been criticized by various security experts. In this line, various defense experts have highlighted that India should diversify its defense imports and such dependency on Russia should not become a barrier for India in case of any geopolitical conflict. So let us look at what are the existing issues and how the India's dependency on Russia in terms of defense imports is now changing. Now, if you look at the data related to defense imports from Russia, Russia commands for about 58% of the total arms imports by India. And this is followed by Israel and US, which stands at about 15% for Israel and 12% for United States of America. And this highlights the over-dependency of India on Russian defense imports. Now, although this number is still very high, the dependency of India on Russian imports of defense has reduced if we compare it to the 2010 to 2014 level. In this line, in 2010-14, Russia had a share of 70% of the Indian defense market. So this clearly highlights that India has already started to diversify its defense imports from Russia, and that is why the share of defense imports of Israel and the US is increasing. However, it is not keeping pace with the Russian defense imports. And this has primarily been because of India's desire to diversify its defense imports, and therefore there is a heightened competition for Russia with other supplies. Now, India has started to diversify its defense imports from Russia primarily because of various issues that exist in India-Russia defense cooperation. In this line, India has highlighted dissatisfaction with the post-sale services and maintenance that is being offered by Russia in terms of defense equipment. Further, India has also raised concerns in the past regarding supply and servicing of these defense supplies. Also, at times there has been huge delay in the supply of the defense equipment. And this is leading to cost escalation for India, which is not appreciated by India. Further, India is also concerned about the high cost of these spare parts and also low quality of the spare parts for the weaponry that is imported from Russia. And at the same time, in the emerging geopolitical context, India is also concerned about sanctions that are being imposed by the West-led countries. And this concern of the sanctions has primarily been because of the CARTSA law of the United States of America, whereby US imposes sanctions on a country which imports from the adversary of United States of America. And India was primarily concerned about such sanctions being imposed on India in terms of the S-400 missile deal. So in this line, we have learned that the Indian dependency on the Russian imports is very high. Although this dependency has decreased if we compare it with the 2010 to 14 level, but still it is very high as compared to other countries like Israel and the US. A second important aspect here is that the share of Israel and US in India's defense imports is increasing, however, it is not very significant. Further, India has raised various concerns regarding post-sales and services and maintenance, also regarding the supply and the servicing of the defense equipment, the cost escalation because of the delay, and also concerns have been raised regarding low quality of spare parts. And India is also concerned about the threat of the sanctions under the US's CARTSA law. In this line, let us look at what has been the impact of the Ukraine war on India-Russia defense cooperation. In this line, it has been highlighted that the supply chain of various spare parts and ammunition has got impacted. And we are already aware that India had concerns regarding the supply of these spare parts as well as ammunition in the past also. And such delay in the supply of the spare parts and ammunition can have huge security implications for India. Now, if you look at certain examples of the existing defense deals and how they have been impacted because of the Ukraine war, the first is the delivery of 2nd Regiment of the S-400 system. And this has been delayed by a few months. Also, India had agreed to operationalize the manufacturing of 6.1 lakh AK-203 rifles in Uttar Pradesh. However, this is yet to be operationalized and this has been delayed because of the Russia-Ukraine war. Further, the deal for the manufacturing of the 200K 226T utility helicopter in India is also under reconsideration. Now, one of the reasons for this reconsideration is because of the Ukraine war. However, in this line, India itself has developed the indigenous light utility helicopter. And that is why there are concerns regarding this particular deal also. However, Russia has assured that it would adhere to the delivery timelines. In this line, concerns have been raised regarding the overstretching of the Ukraine war. And that is why the concerns have been raised that the Russian industry would not be capable of supplying to India because it would be primarily focusing on replenishing the inventories of their own armed forces. So these are certain concerns that have come up because of the Russia-Ukraine war and its impact on the defense supplies to India. Now, as we have seen that there has been considerable impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on the India-Russia defense cooperation. However, because of the existing issues, India had already started to address these issues. In this line, what are the steps that India is undertaking? Let us look at these steps. First is that India is looking at alternative mitigation measures and is trying to identify alternate sources from friendly foreign countries. Further, this crisis can be turned into an opportunity if in the long run, India uses this opportunity for the private sector to step up the production and meet the defense requirements. Further, we are aware that because of the Russia-Ukraine war, the sanctions have been imposed on Russia. In this line, Russia has been excluded from the SWIFT system, which is used for money transfers at the global level. And that is why India's trade with Russia is being impacted. Because at times what happens is that the countries accept payments in internationally accepted currencies only. For example, if India is importing crude oil from Western nations, these countries might expect the payment in dollar system only. And for that, these countries need to be a part of the SWIFT system, which is internationally used for payments. However, now as Russia has been excluded from the SWIFT payment system, India was bound to create certain alternative arrangements. And that is why India and Russia have agreed to conduct payments through their own currencies, that is, rupee and ruble arrangement. Now, the operationalization of the rupee-ruble payment system is also a tedious job. And that is why small payments have now been resumed. However, work is still on to resolve the larger payment systems. Now, for example, the S-400 deal requires large payments. And for that, the rupee-ruble arrangement is not capable enough. And that is why this is still being worked upon. Now, besides these alternative arrangements, India is also reconsidering all the direct defense import deals with various foreign countries. And that is why several big ticket deals that are currently under negotiation Several of them have been deferred by the Defense Ministry as a part of review of all the direct import deals. Now, this has primarily been because India's over dependency on defense imports from various countries has been raised as a concern for India's security. And it is highlighted that India should focus on defense indigenization and also should focus on improving the local defense equipment manufacturing industry. This will also save the precious foreign reserve, and this might also resolve the problem of the balance of payment in the long run. And that is why India has also been focusing on and has been making efforts to push the Make in India scheme in the defense sector. So these are certain steps that India is undertaking where India is trying to mitigate the direct impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on defense supplies to India, and India is identifying alternative sources from friendly foreign countries. At the same time, India is looking at this as an opportunity for developing the indigenous private sector in defense equipment manufacturing. Also, we are looking for the payment alternatives because Russia has now been excluded from the global SWIFT system for money transfer, and that is why both the countries are involved in creating an alternative payment system which is known as Russia Ruble Agreement. At the same time, India is reviewing all direct import deals and is also focusing on giving push to the Make in India scheme in defense so that India can achieve defense indigenization. So these are few important aspects of India-Russia defense cooperation, how it is being impacted because of the Ukraine war, what were certain existing issues, and what is India doing in this line. With this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 8 is related to the powers and the functions of the National Investigating Agency, or the NIA as it is famously called. Now, NIA has come into news because the case related to the murder in the Udaipur has been transferred from the state government to the NIA for its investigation. And that is why the functioning of the National Investigation Agency has come into the news. In this context, we should also understand how does the NIA take up cases from the state governments or what has been provided in the law related to NIA. In this context, in the mains examination of 2019, in the security section in General Studies paper 3, a question was asked in the mains examination. It read, the Indian government has recently strengthened the anti-terrorism laws by amending the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act 1967 and the NIA Act. Analyze the changes in the context of the prevailing security environment while discussing the scope and the reasons for the opposition of the UAPA by the human rights organization. In this context, we will try to understand the basic functionings and the acts associated with the National Investigation Agency and also the issues related to federalism that have been raised against NIA and also the issues that have been raised by the human rights organization. In this line, we first need to understand why was the NIA created in the first place. Now, NIA was created or constituted in the wake of 26/11 Mumbai terror attack in November 2008. Now, this was primarily done to develop a national police force to investigate a selected class of criminal offences that constitute a direct threat to national safety. Now, the Mumbai terror attack of 2008 was seen as a watershed moment in Indian government's preparedness against terrorism. And that is why specialized agencies and various other authorities were created to handle the issue of terrorism and threats to national security. And under this particular thought process, the NIA was created. In this line, let us look at what exactly is this NIA. So basically, it is a central agency which is mandated to investigate all the offences affecting the sovereignty, security and integrity of India, friendly relations with foreign states, and offences under the statutory laws enacted to implement international treaties, agreements, conventions, and resolutions of the United Nations, its agencies, and other international organizations. So basically, it is an agency that has been created by the Parliament to investigate offences which affect sovereignty, security, and integrity of India. Now, this kind of power that has been provided to NIA also includes terror acts and their possible links with crimes like smuggling of arms, drugs, and fake Indian currency, as well as infiltration from across the border. And we are aware that all these organized crimes and their linkages to the terrorism pose a great security threat to India, especially because Indian borders are vulnerable to all these organized crimes as well as infiltration of terrorists. In this line, the agency has the power to search, seize, arrest, and prosecute those involved in such offences. And the law under which the agency operates extends to the whole of the India and also applies to the Indian citizens outside the country. So looking at the territorial reach of the National Investigation Agency, it operates or extends to whole of India and also applies to Indian citizens who are outside the country. So that is how we see that NIA has certain extraordinary powers to handle the issues associated with terrorism and their linkages to the organized crime. In this line, in the National Investigation Agency Act, various acts have been included on which the NIA has power to investigate, and these are called as scheduled offences. And the scheduled offences have been included in different acts like the Explosive Substances Act, Atomic Energy Act, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, Anti-Hijacking Act, and so forth and so on. Further, in September 2020, the central government empowered the NIA to also probe offences under the Narcotic, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act that are connected to the terror cases. So all the offences under these acts are termed as scheduled offences, and the NIA has power to investigate on all these offences. Now, in the present case in Udaipur, the NIA has taken over the investigation from the state government of Rajasthan. And that is why we need to understand how does the NIA takes up the case from the state government. And this particularly has also been an issue which has been raised that it breaches the federal structure. In this line, the first way in which the NIA can take up a case from the state government is when the state government themselves refer the cases pertaining to the scheduled offences which are registered at any police station to the central government for the NIA investigation. So if the state governments consider that a particular crime has been committed in their state which is relating to the scheduled offences related to the acts that we have just seen, it can refer that particular case to the central government for NIA's investigation. And after assessing the details that are made available by the state government, the center can then direct the agency to take over the case. And that is where the state governments are required to extend all the assistance to the National Investigating Agency. However, there is a second manner in which the NIA can take up the cases from the state governments, and this is by the suo motu cognizance by the central government. This is when central government feels that an act of crime has been committed in a state which is related to the scheduled offences under the NIA Act. It can take up that particular case for the investigation of the NIA without even the consent of the state governments. So this means that when the central government is of the opinion that a scheduled offence has been committed which is required to be investigated under the Act, it may suo motu direct the agency to take up over the probe. Third way in which the central government can take up a case for NIA's consideration is when the central government finds that a scheduled offence has been committed at any place outside India to which this act extends. It can also direct the NIA to register the case and take up the investigation. And finally, the NIA can also investigate any other offence which the accused is alleged to have committed if the offence is connected to the scheduled offences. So these are the three ways in which the NIA can take up the cases from the state governments. In this context, when the NIA takes up the cases from the state government, issues related to the federal structure have been raised in the past against the formation of the NIA itself. So let us look at the issues associated with the federalism related to the National Investigation Agency Act. In this line, various issues have been raised against the suo motu cognizance by the central government for investigating crimes which might fall under the state government sphere, because this is seen as direct interference in the federal structure where the powers between the central government and the state government have been divided by the constitution itself. Further, the issue here is that when the central government takes suo motu cognizance, the state governments do not have any say in this particular case. However, if you look at the constitutional provisions carefully, it has been highlighted that the public order and policing are the subject matter of the state governments. However, in case of criminal law and criminal procedure, both the governments enjoy parallel powers or powers simultaneously. That is, the criminal law and the criminal procedure both fall in the concurrent list in the 7th schedule. And on this particular issue, both the central and the state governments have the power to legislate. And when a law of the state government comes into contradiction with the powers of the central government, then the central government's law has to prevail. In this line, the Bombay High Court had upheld the constitutional validity of the National Investigation Agency. In this, the court said that when the parliament is competent to enact the law for the subjects enumerated in the schedule to the NIA Act, it is equally competent to create an agency for the investigation of the offences specified in it. It was highlighting the concurrent powers of the state and the central governments to create laws on the issues mentioned in the concurrent list in the 7th schedule. In this line, issues have been raised against potential of political interference in the functioning of the states, even in routine law and order cases. So this is only one flip side that has been raised, because if the sphere of functioning of both the central and the state governments is clearly defined, it will not create problem in the operations. But when there is overlapping jurisdiction, there are always chances of conflict and confrontation between the central and the state governments, which is a direct challenge to the federal structure and the federalism in India. In this line, issues have also been raised against the NIA Act and the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act because of the recent amendments that were brought out in 2019 by various human rights organizations. Let us look at these aspects now. In this line, a PIL was filed against the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. In this particular PIL, it was said that the UAPA restricts the right of dissent of the citizens. And this restriction on the right of dissent stands in contradiction to the Article 14, which talks about the right to equality, Article 19, which talks about right to freedom of speech and expression, Article 21, which is about the right to life. And the biggest issue associated with the UAPA is that it does not offer any person who is accused of being terrorist any chance to justify his case prior to his arrest. And that is why it has been highlighted that the UAPA authorizes the government to arrest any citizen who may commit the crimes listed in the schedule, and not just after the committing of the crime. This means that on mere apprehension that a particular person might commit a crime related to the UAPA, the government can arrest that particular person. The third issue associated with the UAPA and the NIA Act is that it prohibits disagreement, because it can be used to criminalize political protests that produce disaffection with the state. And we should be aware that legitimate protests have been constitutionally safeguarded. And that is why every political protest cannot be seen as disaffection with the state. But provided the ambiguity in the provisions of the UAPA law, such provisions can be misinterpreted to suit the political ideology of the ruling government. In this line, it has also been highlighted that the NIA and the UAPA Act stand against the Article 21, that is right to life and liberty. In this line, those who are apprehended under the UAPA Act can be imprisoned for up to 180 days without being charged. That is, even without presenting charges against these persons can be apprehended by the government. Another issue associated with the UAPA Act is that it grants government vast discretionary powers and enables the establishment of the special courts with the ability to use secret witnesses and to hold closed-door hearings. And this primarily can be seen as against a rule of law where things are or things should be predictable in nature. And further, there is one important issue that has been highlighted, and that is the provision of designating individuals as terrorists. And this can be misused against political opponents by the political parties which are in power. So these are certain issues that have been highlighted against the UAPA Act or the NIA Act. So in this particular discussion, we have understood how the NIA takes up the cases from the state governments in case of crimes that are committed in these states, and also some of the human rights related issues that have been highlighted or raised against the UAPA and the NIA Act. With this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 9 talks about a famous Supreme Court judgment that was Nalsa versus Union of India in 2014, which declared transgenders to be the third gender. And that is why the Supreme Court had asked the central government to formulate law for the betterment and protection of the transgender community. In this line, the government enacted the Transgender Persons Act 2019. In this context, let us try and understand the key features or highlights of the Nalsa versus Union of India judgment, in which the Supreme Court of India highlighted about the rights of the transgender community. And after that, we will understand the salient features of the Transgender Persons Protection of Right Act 2019. In this famous judgment, the Supreme Court highlighted that by not providing the right to identify themselves, it is the violation of the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution of India. And the court held that the non-recognition of gender identity results in discrimination on grounds of gender, violates the right to equality and right to life under Article 14 and Article 21. And because of such non-recognition of the rights, the transgenders were compelled to declare themselves as either male or female for access of various public and other services. Secondly, the Supreme Court highlighted the lack of access to basic needs. In this line, the lack of recognition of their gender identity curtailed their access to education, healthcare, and public places. Further, court accepted a broad definition of the transgender, including persons whose gender identity, gender expression, or behavior did not conform to their biological sex, and those who did not identify with the sex assigned to them at the birth. Further, the court highlighted the need for rights-based approach, and the court had articulated that the transgender persons should no more be treated with cruelty, pity, or charity. And the court also ordered the government to take necessary steps to remove social stigma, promote transgender-specific health programs, and grant them equal legal protection. In this line, the court had also highlighted certain famous international practices. In this, it highlighted the progressive jurisprudence of other countries such as UK, Australia, New Zealand, etc., towards recognizing the basic rights of the transsexual persons. The court also highlighted the transgenders have right to expression under Article 19(1)(a), and it also includes one's right to expression of one's self-identified gender, and no restriction can be placed on one's personal appearance or choice of dressing. And also, the identity of the transgenders fell in broad interpretation of the Article 21, where the court stated that the Article 21 broadly protects those aspects of life which go to make a person's life meaningful, including one's right of self-determination of the gender to which a person belongs. And based on this broad interpretation of the right of the transgender community to identify themselves as transgenders, the Government of India has enacted the Transgender Persons Act 2019. Now, what are some of the features of the Transgender Persons Act 2019? First is that it seeks to establish the National Council for Transgender Persons. Secondly, it provides a definition of the transgender persons, and this act defines a transgender person as one whose gender does not match the gender assigned at the birth. And it includes trans men and trans women, persons with intersex variation, genderqueers, and persons with socio-cultural identities such as Kinnars and Hijras. Regarding the certificate of identity, the Act states that a transgender person shall have the right to self-perceived gender identity. That is, they can identify themselves as either males, females, or even as a third gender. Now, this concept of identity is in spirit with the international conventions, particularly the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948 and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights 1966 and the Yogyakarta Principles of 2006. The Act further recognizes that the transgender persons have a legal right to self-perceived gender identity in accordance with the principle of psychological test instead of the biological test. Then a certificate of identity can be obtained at the district magistrate's office, and a revised certificate has to be obtained if sex is changed. The Act also has a provision that provides transgenders the right of residence with parents and immediate family members. Earlier, families used to abandon the transgender child that was born. Further, the Act prohibits discrimination against a transgender person in various sectors such as education, employment, and healthcare. And this Act also provides that the offences against transgender persons will attract imprisonment between 6 months and 2 years in addition to a fine. So these are few features of the transgender persons which provides them an identity and also recognizes their right and aims at ending discrimination against this community. Now, regarding the upliftment of the transgender community, Garima Grahs have been established by the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. And these are basically a shelter home for transgender persons. Under this, the ministry has decided to set up shelter homes for transgender persons who have been forced to leave their homes or have been abandoned by their family. Further, these Garima Grahs will be run by transgender community-led organizations, and these shelters will also provide skill training to connect the community members with livelihood opportunities. Other steps include Odisha recently categorized transgenders under the below poverty line category, which will enable the community to avail socio-economic benefits. Kerala came out with a transgender policy, and Tamil Nadu constituted the Arvanis Welfare Board in 2008 for providing pension to this community. So these are some of the steps that have been taken by the Government of India via the Act and also various state governments for the upliftment of the transgender community. This data point on page number 7 is related to the recent ban on single-use plastic by the Government of India. In this line, the Government of India has banned various articles that include single-use plastics, which can include ice cream sticks, thermocol, plates, cups, glasses, forks, etc. So in this context of the ban on the single-use plastics, the data that has been provided by this particular data point can become important for us from the mains examination perspective in writing answers related to single-use plastic. In this line, the State of India's Environment 2022 report highlights that 35% of India's plastic waste is in the form of multi-layered packaging, which is non-recyclable. In this, further 68% of the plastic waste ends up in dump sites and landfills, and with only 12% of the plastic being recycled. Further, 20% of this plastic is burnt, which enters into the atmosphere in the form of greenhouse gases that are generated or emitted because of the burning of this plastic. And that is why this data can be important to justify the ban on single-use plastic. In this line, the share of different types of plastics has been provided in this data point. First is the polystyrene, which is an inexpensive resin which is found everywhere, and it is included in beverages, cups to eggs cartons, as well as disposable dinnerware. And it is amongst the worst types of plastics. Second is the high density polythene, and it accounts for about 7% share in India's plastic waste. And this is used for grocery bags, milk jugs, recycling, etc. And they are one of the easiest plastic polymers to recycle. Third is the polyethylene terephthalate, which is mostly used for food and drinking packaging purposes because it prevents oxygen from spoiling the contents inside. And it is the most widely recycled plastic in the world. Fourth is the polypropylene, which can withstand high temperatures and is used in Tupperwares, car parts, thermal vests, etc. Then there is low density polyethylene, which is the simplest structure of all the plastics, and it is used in plastic bags, various containers, and is not often recycled. And then there is multi-layered packaging, which is made of plastics and other composite layers such as aluminum foil, etc. They are used for packaging and they are non-recyclable at commercial scale. Then as far as the plastic waste is concerned, there is a category of waste which is called as mismanaged waste, which does not get into the cycle of recycling. And that is why this is the material which is at high risk of entering the oceans via wind or tidal transport. And in 2019, India produced an estimated 9.5 kg of mismanaged waste per person. Further, if you look at the categories of the plastics that we have seen in this data point, a question was asked in the prelims examination of 2022 based on one of the categories. So the question read, with reference to the polyethylene terephthalate, the use of which is so widespread in our daily lives, consider the following statements. First is that its fibers can be blended with wool and cotton fibers to reinforce their properties. Second is the containers made of it can be used to store any alcoholic beverage. Third is bottles made of it can be recycled into other products. And fourth is that the articles made of it can be easily disposed of by incineration without causing greenhouse gas emissions. Now, if you want to dispose the plastic waste by burning it, you cannot do it without causing greenhouse gas emissions. And that is why the fourth statement is outrightly incorrect. Further, if you look at the second statement, it cannot be used as container for alcoholic beverages because the alcohol can intrude into the layers of this particular plastic. And that is why the second statement is also incorrect. So the correct answer is 1 and 3 only. In this context, let us try and understand what is the single-use plastic, what all has been banned, and how it is going to be enforced. So as far as the ban on single-use plastic is concerned, the government of India has banned manufacturing, import, stocking, distribution, sale and use of single-use plastics including the polystyrene and expanded polystyrene, which means that the government of India has banned the entire life cycle through which the plastics get into the environment. That is manufacturing, import, stocking, distribution, sale as well as use of it. So this brings us to what are these single-use plastics. So as the name suggests, these have amongst the highest share of plastic manufactured and used from packaging of items to bottles, polythene bags, face masks, coffee cups, etc. Now single-use because they are used for only one time and then they are thrown as waste. And that is why they are called as single-use plastic. In this line, if you look at the gravity of the problem, the single-use plastics account for about a third of all the plastics produced globally, and with about 98% of these plastics being manufactured from the fossil fuels, so they are indirectly also contributing to greenhouse gas emissions because of burning of the fossil fuel. Further, these single-use plastics could account for about 5 to 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And India features in the top 100 countries of single-use plastic waste generation, and it ranks at 94. Now, what are the items that are being banned? In this line, the items on which the Central Pollution Control Board has announced a ban include various items like earbuds, balloon sticks, candy, etc. In this line, the Government of India had already banned polythene bags under 75 microns in September 2021. And from December, the ban will now be extended to polythene bags under 120 microns. And according to the Plastic Waste Management Rules 2016, there is a complete ban on the sachets using plastic material for storing, packaging and selling gutka, tobacco as well as pan masala. So these are the items that have been banned. This brings us to how is this ban going to be enforced. So as far as the enforcement of the ban is concerned, it will be monitored by the Central Pollution Control Board from the center and by the State Pollution Control Board in the states. And these state pollution control boards will report to the center regularly. Further directions have been issued at national, state and local levels to not supply raw materials to the industries that are engaged in banned items. Also, directions have been issued to state pollution control boards and pollution control committees to modify and revoke the consent to operate under the Air and the Water Act to industries that are engaged in single-use plastic items. Also, local authorities have been directed to issue fresh commercial licenses with the conditions that these single-use plastic items will not be sold on their premises and existing commercial licenses will be cancelled if they are found to be selling these items. Further, those who are found to be violating this ban can be penalized under the Environmental Protection Act 1986. Also, violators can be asked to pay environmental damage compensation by the State Pollution Control Board. And in addition, there are municipal laws on plastic waste with their own penal codes. So this is how the single-use plastic ban is going to be implemented on ground. This article on page number 12 reads that the Mayurbhanj's Aunt Chutney is targeting the GI tag, and this will be important for increasing its reputation across India. In this line, let us learn about this particular chutney that is prepared by the tribes of Mayurbhanj in Odisha. Now, this chutney is famously called as the Kai chutney, and it is produced or created or prepared from the red ants. In this line, providing the GI tag will aid the development of defined hygiene protocol for the preparation of this Kai chutney. Also, it will enhance the reputation and value of the local product and support local businesses. It is one of the favorites among the tribes of the Mayurbhanj district of Odisha, and it is important because it provides them important ingredients as well as minerals like calcium, zinc, vitamin B12, etc. And beaver ants and Ocophylla samardina are abundantly found in Mayurbhanj throughout the year, and they make nests with leaves of host trees. So you can see that this is the one which is used to produce this chutney. And this Kai chutney of Mayurbhanj is targeting the GI tag. With this, we conclude today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day.